I'd now like to introduce what will be our first panel of the day, as you can see by the expert stage change going on behind me. This is going to be called, Is Your Company Developing an Inclusive Culture? The discussion will focus on key elements that make an employer welcoming to a diverse labor pool, from personalized benefits to a sense of belonging. The panel will be moderated by Nicole Smith. Nicole is the Editorial Audience Director at the Harvard Business Review. So, please help me welcome Nicole and our panel speakers.
Okay. We're taking.
Oh. Okay.
Hello, hello. We're in a COVID world. It takes me like 10 minutes to get the mask on and off. How are you guys doing? How was breakfast? Good. I'm so glad to be here, as you may have already heard. My name is Nicole Smith, and I'm a journalist and the Editorial Audience Director for Harvard Business Review. I'm very excited. I actually picked this panel to moderate because I'm very interested in the discussion about what inclusion means. And so we have a group of panelists who are experts here who will help us just break down what that means. I don't want it to be a nebulous term anymore that we just throw around. I want it to have meaning when we use it in the workplace and beyond. You agree? Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we start at the very beginning with Carol. Why don't you tell us who you are, tell us where you work, and tell us why you wanted to be on this panel.
Or why I was voluntold to be on the panel. Yes, so Dr. Carol Henderson, Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion, Chief Diversity Officer and Advisor to the President at Emory University. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with these distinguished scholars of this work. I wanted to be on the panel because it's not only the passion of what I do, it's important at this particular time in our country to have a panel to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion when there is an atmosphere to silence that conversation.
It sounds like you're going to have a lot of good things to say. Yeah. Valerie, why don't you introduce?
Hi, I'm Valerie Norton. I'm Chief People Officer for Habitat for Humanity International. And I was very excited, like you, to meet colleagues and exchange best practices today.
Tommy?
Hello, my name is Tommy Welch, Chief Equity Officer for Gwinnett County Public Schools. Just wanted to join the conversation, and always an advocate, but also willing to learn. So wanted to share the great things that we're doing in Gwinnett County Public Schools, but also the things that are going on across this wonderful state of Georgia to move forward diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Pam.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Pam Pujo. I'm the diversity advocate and consultant with Affirmity. And I wanted to be on this panel when I saw the cultural fit. That's always strikes a chord with me. And just to let everyone know and share my thoughts and beliefs on that, it's about culture that should fit within your organizations and not making individuals fit within the culture.
Certainly, last but not least, Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hilligis. I lead the talent, leadership development, and learning teams at Whitecap. And similar to my fellow panelists, I want to share best practices, learn from each of them, and share some of what we're doing in our organization.
Wonderful. You will get to share a lot today. So we're going to first start with Tommy. I want to just get a baseline understanding of your definition of what inclusion even is.
Yeah. Inclusion is about engagement, but not just engagement with a sense of belonging, self-worth, full inclusion, but being able to bring your entire self to work with you or to whatever function that's available. So inclusion is about that ultimate level of engagement. And does everyone have a self-worth and dignity in that space where you create that wonderful environment for inclusion?
So what does that look like in practical terms when I see it?
So when you see it, you should see, one, maximum engagement, but you should see where people have voice, and not just voice, but authentic engagement in the outputs of the organization. So when you see it working well, you see high levels of engagement, high levels of productivity from individuals and major stakeholders. So in this space, we often talk about identifying those who may have been traditionally marginalized. So are you intentionally going out and seeking those voices? You have measurements in which you can identify where they are not taking place and have strategic engagement tools to go out and seek and include those voices in the end product of what you have.
Voice is very important. No one will ever take away my voice, just an FYI. I'm actually curious, Carol, do you have anything to add to that, what your definition of inclusion is?
Well, I think Tommy did a great job with that. I would also say inclusion is intentional. It's about values, it's about traditions. I'm in higher education, and so in order to have all students, all faculty, all staff feel that they're in an environment where they can thrive and flourish, that goes beyond the perfunctory notion of inclusion, but also the voice. People will tell you what they need, and so it's listening to that and then allowing them to be a part of the solution and the process.
So tell me the difference between diversity and inclusion, because we hear those used together a lot, and we hear them used interchangeably a lot, but is there a difference? And if there is, tell me what the difference is.
There is a difference. So we have diversity on this panel, but if all of us are not allowed to speak, we're not all included.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a distinction between diversity and inclusion when they think about it? Or do you make it distinctive when you talk about it?
Oh, yeah, very much the same.
Please.
And the measures are really different. So diversity, it's real, you can count it quantitatively, and inclusion, I guess, through employee surveys and other mechanisms that give you feedback, you can tell if people feel included. I heard a wonderful description the other day. You know, we often say people feel included when they feel welcomed, but it's when they feel expected.
Right.
I love that.
And elaborate on that. What do you mean by expected feeling?
That your being there is not a surprise. That you're being there, you're very much expected to be part of that environment.
Okay. So then it just makes me think about, where do we start? And I want to jump to Pam over here. Where do we start if we say, okay, I'm not sure that we're inclusive as an organization, as a community, as I want to be. Where does that start, where I make people or ask people to be accountable? Is it that the leadership? Is it rank and file? Is it all the layers, all the things? Where do I start if I want to be inclusive?
And I think a lot of companies have that question now, like how do they drive that inclusive environment? I think when we start with the top leadership, that really sets the tone for the organization, because your leaders are more visible internally as well as externally. So how they role model inclusive behavior within their organizations should transcend and trickle throughout the organization. And I think with leadership, they also have the capability to allocate resources to diversity and inclusion efforts. They can allocate, funding and budget. They can allocate human capital. And they can make sure that other leaders within the organization have a strategic plan that they can follow and embed D&I throughout your organizations. We don't want diversity and inclusion siloed within the HR function or within a DEI team, and those leaders have that capability to really push out their beliefs on diversity and inclusion throughout all of their different business units.
Have any of you had initiatives where you had to spark inclusion? From the beginning, you recognized that it's not as inclusive as it needs to be, and you were in charge of infusing inclusiveness.
Yes, in school systems, we do a lot of surveys, and those of you who are parents, you probably may have participated in those. We always seek input on different items. But you find if you begin to track where the input comes from, whether it's by zip code, area, cluster, or school, you might find in different spaces that you only really hear from certain individuals. So instead of taking a look and saying, well, maybe they just didn't want to complete the survey, what is it that the organization might be unintentionally communicating through their communication efforts where they lack to engage their stakeholders? So we begin to look at where our survey results were coming from, how could we better engage those that were not engaging, and we found out a lot of different things. One, the way that we were communicating, the assumption was that everyone wanted it via email. We learned that text messaging was probably the best way to increase that. Yes. We also learned that communicating at first in English and then saying, press this number if you want the other language, doesn't work best if you don't speak English. So you need to make sure that you have your primary languages up front the same way you do English. So we learned those things, but being intentional about drawing in your end stakeholders, as we call them, or your population that you're trying to reach.
Very good. Always hit me up via text, by the way, if you want my attention. So I'm going to go all the way at the end, but I'm going to ask each one of you to answer this question. I want to start with Jamie. So what if someone is actually threatened by inclusiveness? And what I mean by that is that maybe their social capital, their power stands on the foundation of excluding other people. How do you tackle that? How do you help people feel comfortable with the idea of inclusion? What do you do if someone is threatened by that very idea?
Yeah, so I mean, we're in the construction supply industry. It's not the most advanced industry, but we are doing a lot to drive inclusion throughout our organization. We see it as a differentiator with our competitors, and so we've met each leader on their own journey. So some of our leaders are trying to dismantle systemic racism, right? And some of them are very new to the terminology. And so we meet with each of them, we coach them, we find them on their journey, and then we try to take them to where we're going as an organization. And when you do have some of those leaders that they won't get on the bus, then we have to find, employment for them elsewhere. But it's something that we believe in from the leadership down, and we have to get everyone moving in the same direction, even if they are maybe on different parts of the journey.
That kind of goes with Pam was saying, the leadership aspect, starting with the leaders and get on the bus.
Exactly.
What do you think, Pam? How do you deal with someone who perhaps is threatened by inclusion?
And I think just piggybacking what Jamie said, education is a key component to helping everyone feel comfortable, really explaining the rationale why we need to be an inclusive organization and how it benefits the business. And we could create that win-win situation for everyone and bring all those diverse thoughts to the table to help the company move forward.
Tommy?
Yes, I think, it always starts at the top. So one thing that I found is the opportunity for dialogue in a safe place has to be there for everyone, including those who may not completely understand where you're going yet. So it's a growth. And this professional development takes place, but there is a certain point where it has to be embedded in the KPIs, so it's aligned with their performance. Because we all know that sometimes people's their ability to align with the company's vision and mission sometimes may not always be in sync, but the KPIs help individuals move along. So I always, when I'm working with individuals, I try to always bring it back to what is our bottom line for business. And working with our CEO, I always try to make sure that the work of DEI is embedded within the KPIs. So when I reach that sticky conversation, we can go beyond how you feel and what your political views may be, and say that our bottom line here is to ensure that we increase our inclusion, so that our students learn at the maximum rate that they can. And here's where it shows up in your measurement, and you're failing to do that. So that's my advice on that.
Valerie?
So for Habitat, DE&I is part of our DNA, because we're all about fairness and equity in housing. And so it's a little easier to explain to employees because it's so woven into what we started out to do. But sometimes there will be people that are a little uncomfortable, like when I arrived 4 years ago, we didn't have employee resource groups. And there were people who didn't understand why we needed to have employee resource groups.
What do you do?
But we did. And so I actually had to do educational sessions about what is the purpose of an employee resource group, what does that bring to the organization, and and also the top leadership being very supportive of the concept and ensuring that people allowed time for people to attend employee resource group events, participate, and act as leaders of those groups. So 4 years later, these are very robust groups that have contributed so much to the organization's culture.
Before we listen to Carol on your answer, can you just explain to everyone what employee resource groups are? Because I find that I say ERG and people look at me like I have 10 heads.
Oh, okay.
So if you could
Some people use different names for them. Sometimes people call them business resource groups or affinity groups, but groups of employees who have something in common and they can fulfill many functions. One is just a sense of belonging. So to the sense of belonging and community we were talking about earlier. Sometimes they may have common issues that they want to bring forward to the organization and have leadership hear them. In these times with working from home, so we all have mostly all been working from home for the last 2 years. They're a tremendous source of community and some fun too. But education, some of our employee resource groups have done book clubs, for example, on the book White Fragility and on the book Me and White Supremacy. So these have been very educational for all of our population. So we have 7 employee resource groups, most of the ones you might expect there to be, but one that's kind of different, which is a remote employees resource group. Because we had over half of our employees that were remote all the time, and they felt left out, and so they had common issues. And anyway, that's enough probably, but I hope that helps.
No, it's actually giving me ideas because I'm a remote employee. So
you start one of those, yeah.
Carol, so someone feels threatened by inclusiveness, the very idea of it. What do you do? Educate,
Find allies to engage that individual. Also provide tools. Often I find that people are threatened by inclusiveness because they're fearful that something's going to be taken away from them, or that will be excluded or blamed for something. And so usually education, I think, is a great tool to assist in that engagement, and then to listen. I think that's what was said in the previous statement, if I can listen. If you're going to respect me, we have to have rules of engagement, a common ground values, tie it back to, at Emory, our mission is to create, teach, preserve, and apply knowledge in the service of humanity. So if that's our mission, my comment or question to the individual that doesn't want to engage in that is, well, give me your explanation of how you will live out our mission. And then maybe we can start from there.
I find it interesting you said that they might be threatened because they can lose something. What do you think that, or have you observed that people feel that they might lose if they include?
Oh, that list is long. But I will say power, social capital, status, and inclusion costs. And sometimes people don't want to pay that bill.
Yeah, that's very good, very good. It's time to pay up.
Yeah.
So I want to go to Valerie next. I heard that someone told me that if you want to change the culture of a community, of an organization, you must change the behaviors first. My first question is, what types of behaviors threaten inclusiveness?
Well, Carol started to go there, so I'm going to build off of what she said. Lack of transparency, defensiveness, lack of empathy, protectionism, privilege, favoritism, denial. It's a really long list, but those are some of the ones that come to mind first. And those things all chip away at trust and relationships.
Yeah. What do you see, Tommy, that's commonplace that threatens inclusiveness?
I think the power one is a huge piece. When power changes, people fear that because they're used to operating and understanding the layout of a certain environment. They know how to navigate it. And when you change that board, per se, or you try to redesign it, people get a little anxious. They get fearful of the unknown. So I think that's a huge piece there is the power dynamics that engage. Also, I think that there's a piece there of the way that things have been done. People are used to operating in that space, and what I mean by that is even for those who maybe have been marginalized, they may have been used to operating in that space, and based upon historical context, stepping out into another brave space can be fearful as well. So the power dynamics there are something that you definitely have to facilitate, be strategic about how you equip each individual with the tools to navigate this new terrain that you're attempting to create. Because there's a reason why people did not step into that brave space. There's a reason why people did not create that brave space. So I think you have to be intentional of creating those spaces and equipping people with the tools so that can be facilitated and take place. Mm-hmm. That is our role. That's what we do. So I think that that's very important.
What do you think about what he said, Pam?
I think, the change dynamics, oftentimes people are fearful of change, fearful of that unknown and how it will impact their situation. And that's where those change management skills come in, having that conversation, that critical dialogue, just to let everyone know that change can be positive moving forward. We can be innovative and keep the organization moving forward with constructive change.
And just really quickly, Jamie, what are some commonplace attitudes that threaten inclusiveness?
Well, I think it's what everyone said, and how we try to position it is we're not trying to make the pie smaller or make your piece of the pie smaller. We're trying to make the pie bigger. And so just framing it to your point around power and opportunities is that it creates more opportunities. And so exactly to what Pam was saying around fear and change, helping them manage through it and come up with a plan and see that there are more opportunities.
So I'm not going to let you get away that easy, right? When you say it creates more opportunities, what do you mean by that?
So we think of our kind of DEI framework as a competitive advantage with, I mentioned before, our, others in our industry. And so, when we think about the construction industry and there are more Hispanic businesses growing, right? If we don't have more Hispanic associates to service in a bilingual way, or just people who feel comfortable coming into our organization, then our piece of the pie gets smaller. But the more we're able to think about how can we service women in the industry, because that's a growing trend in the construction industry, how can we make it more open for everyone to come into our organization, to feel comfortable, to want to buy our products, it makes it so that there are more opportunities.
Women can do construction.
Yes, and we've expanded our product line for women, so.
Wonderful,
yeah.
wonderful. So I want to jump over to Carol and ask you the reciprocal question. What type of behaviors actually foster, develop, encourage inclusiveness?
I think one is understanding what the common good is. So for us, it's getting everyone moving towards a common goal. And we don't all arrive at that at the same place. And so for me, fostering that means having students, faculty, and staff at the same table to engage about what a thriving campus community looks like. Mm-hmm. For faculty to hear how students are perceiving their experience, for students to understand where a faculty member is coming from, and then for a faculty member to understand their status and how they engage staff members in their space. That at the end of the day, we're all human beings who happen to be students, who happen to be faculty, who happen to be staff. And so how do we honor that in the work that we do? Because if we're creating and innovating, because we know inclusion creates a robust critical thinking, innovation to address some of society's most pressing issues, we have to be inclusive in order for that to happen.
Have to be, I 100% agree. Pam, I want to know with you behaviors that you recommend, that you encourage to foster inclusivity.
I think looking at the new generation, one way to foster is feeling a belonging, a sense of belonging. I think leaders need to start working on that skill set to create a sort of empathy where employees will feel like, okay, they really care about me, they value me, my belonging here, they value my ideas and my input. So looking at creating a sense of belonging and starting to lead with a feeling of empathy.
Nice. So I want to step back a little bit, and let's get to the beginning of the process when someone possibly could come into your organization, right? That's hiring. Right? And so I want to ask Valerie, what kind of questions can you ask someone you are interviewing or that you are thinking about hiring to get a gauge of what their point of view is on inclusivity?
Well, I think the classic answer for any talent acquisition person or interviewing manager is some kind of behavioral event interviewing question. So asking them to tell you about a time when they had built a diverse team or they had a diverse team, and what did they do in that situation to make everyone feel included. That might give you a little bit of an insight. And if they have an example of where they didn't have a diverse or inclusive team, what they did to build it. I think it would be good to ask them what their employees, their team members, either current or previous, would say about them in terms of making them feel included.
That's nice. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? When hiring, what can you ask? That was excellent.
I mean, I ask about cultures they thrive in. So, do you like transparency? Do you, what kinds of environment? Because it helps to understand, are they more command and control? Are they more open, honest conversations? So those are one of the questions we always ask.
Very nice.
And what we do is we ask faculty members, if we're hiring faculty, what is your teaching philosophy around that? So it gets to a deeper process where it's not check the box, but it's about the values that guide your work, both in teaching, research, and service.
Yeah, that makes sense, because if you ask someone, are you inclusive, that the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to go to Tommy really quickly. Education, and then we'll turn to Carol for this. Can inclusiveness be taught in school?
Yes, 100%. Inclusiveness, I always think about, the statistics say that a child really begins to develop their identity starting at age 5, or acknowledging their identity at age 5. There's no correlation, that's not by accident. That is a strong correlation with when they start school and begin to be socialized with others. So I think it's very important. Not only for the staff, but the students engaged in that space, to have a strong inclusive environment so that people and students can bring their authentic selves to school.
A 5-year-old brings their authentic selves?
They don't have any other way. That's all they know. And working with children, they're very authentic. They'll tell your business at home all day. So you got to be careful what you say around them, right? But they're also, especially if they grew up in a homogeneous, if they started in a homogeneous area, meaning that everyone they're around looked like them. When they go into this new environment, they're very curious. So who teaches them the appropriate way to engage without tearing someone else down, right? I know some of you may have shared these stories or know these stories. My daughter, when she went to school, the first thing people noticed was her skin. She knew she was brown, but it didn't mean anything to her until someone else started to point it out. And when students begin to other individuals, it happens at the age of 5, at the age of 4. We can't play with you because of X, Y, or Z. Well, we have to teach them that it is okay to do those things. And then also with the staff members, if you're trying to create, and businesses always say this, I want to create a diverse environment, Well, if your environment is not inclusive, you can recruit diversity all you want to. They're not going to stay. So as employees, we know that it increases productivity. We know that it increases better results as in regards to your product and your services. So you have to work on that environment of inclusion to ensure that you attract and retain the best talent. So that's from a teacher standpoint. But with children, it's very important to create that inclusive environment. I'm sure you all want your children to go to a school that they feel loved and cared for in that environment. And the first step is that they feel included and have a sense of belonging.
I want to point out something that Tommy said. If you recruit someone and hire and have them in your work environment and the environment is not inclusive, they will not stay.
Yeah.
Let's think about that. Carol, I want to bounce the question to you. Can inclusiveness be taught in schools? And I'm interested in your take because you're at Emory, right? And so now we're not dealing with 5-year-olds. We're dealing with young adults and adulthood. Can that still be taught?
Yes, we have to meet people where they are and grow with them. And we have to, I think one of the things, knowledge is power, and we've always been diverse. So I'm always amazed at that question. Can we be inclusive? Can we be, what is diversity? The world has always been that way. We have created silos to exclude people. We have created systems to exclude folks. So if people can do that, then we can undo that. And so yes, inclusion can be taught. It has to be taught in a way that will allow that person to see what they will gain from it, and that it will enhance their skill set and the gifts and talents they already have.
Beautiful. So I want to jump to Pam and ask you, I think of inclusion and inclusiveness. Does that mean I feel safe?
And that's a good question, Nicole. And I think it depends on the level of inclusiveness. You know, when we go into our workplaces, they may have these grand statements that we are an inclusive organization, but it's just that, a statement. The behaviors, and we talked about behaviors earlier, may be completely different within the organization. So I think we really need to focus on making sure that the behaviors show inclusiveness. Do I feel included on my teams? Am I being asked to participate on certain projects? Or am I just here to fulfill maybe your diversity demographics? So I think we need to make sure that I feel that belonging, like I mentioned earlier, sense of being valued, that my input and my opinions matter. I think that helps me feel safe to speak up more and participate more and really deliver to the business like I need to and use my skill set. And I will feel safe in that type of environment.
So I don't get off the hook if I say we're inclusive. I have to actually follow through and ensure that people feel that way as much as I'm trying to create the environment.
Yes, because I think we can all give lip service at one point in time, but we have to stand behind that with action.
Very nice. So, Carol, I'd like to jump to you. And the reason I'm going to ask this question to you is because you work with a leader, provost, right? And I want to know, how can leaders put inclusiveness in the environment, in the organization, if symbols around them say the opposite, right? If artifacts around them say the opposite. If you have all white men at the top, right, and all people of color at the bottom, that's a symbol. That's a message. What do you do if you come in and you're a manager, you're a leader, and you have opposite symbols, but you want to create an environment of inclusiveness?
Accountability. And I think that you have to change, you have to walk the walk, and you have to do it in a way that is sustainable. It's not enough just to change people out. So people are not pieces on a chessboard that you can just include and not include. You have to change the values, the behavior, socialize that difference, and then, as has been stated before, make that part of your performance management system to get that change. It's amazing how people listen when their money is at stake.
You have my ear.
Yes. And that shouldn't be the only carrot. I think also what the benefits of that are. But yeah, you have to do the work and understand that it is a culturation that has to happen over time and be sustained within the infrastructure of the company, because if it's based on personality and people, when people leave, the tide will change. But if it's built in the infrastructure, then everyone that's there knows they're accountable for that work.
Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I think the leadership communication about their intent is also really critical. So, you know, everybody can see what that, in your scenario, what that senior team looks like. If the leader says, I'm not satisfied with this, we're going to change this, and here's how I want to change it and by when. and makes that clear and public and transparent, and then people begin to see the actions toward that, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's stick with Valerie since you're also answering questions. I want to talk about bias. Now, this is my opinion, my bias. I believe bias jeopardizes inclusion. Right? I believe prejudice, discrimination, it jeopardizes inclusion. So my question to you is how do we become aware of our own biases?
So I mentioned earlier the employee resource groups and also some of the training that we've done. I think that education is one of the first steps. I think empathy building is a key piece of that. So some of the books that I mentioned earlier, we had book clubs around white fragility. At first, it was very difficult to get people to come. But as people began to come and listen and feel more comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, it made a huge, huge difference. The Me and White Supremacy book, which was amazing, we had hundreds of people join that book club. And it really was humbling and thought-provoking for all those folks that participated. So I think those sorts of educational opportunities raise it up. I think I saw something wonderful the other day about empathy glasses. Has anybody heard about these? But it's like virtual reality glasses where you could be in the situation of someone who you want to understand better and see what life is like for them. That's an extreme technology approach, but beginning to have and build that empathy. We've done it through storytelling. So having open dialogues after the George Floyd murder, we had a lot of open dialogues where people could tell their stories about getting pulled over or being treated badly by police and being watched in a store or being followed. What does it feel like for our very colleagues that we work with every day to have to live with that? So that kind of builds empathy and I think helps drop some of that bias.
Yeah, you're making me have empathy because I don't think a lot of my personal colleagues at where I worked really thought about the Black experience, and then I shared, they're used to me, right? They're not necessarily thinking a cop is approaching me. I don't look, but I've had many encounters, and so some positive, a lot not. And so what you're saying, me sharing that story, a couple of stories that they had never heard, maybe never even thought about to ask, I think it helped them empathize a little bit with the Black community. Yeah. Before we move on to the next question, Tommy, how do I see my own bias?
Yeah, I think that there are wonderful tools out there that you can use to help you begin to navigate where you are on that spectrum. But I think that the biggest piece is what we've already talked about, empathy. Putting yourself in other people's shoes and how you do that. You can do that through education. What we do empathy walks, where we try to walk in someone's shoes, literally. So, we'll shadow someone and look at the world through their perspective and ask them along the way, how they felt when things occurred. So what we try to do is I focus a lot on the end user, so we walk with our students. We go through their schedules from bus stop to bus stop, at the beginning of the day all the way to the end of the day. Same thing with our employees to see how they see what we're trying to accomplish. And it helps you develop that product. And what I mean by that product is we typically always create things for individuals, and changing the narrative is now how can we create these things with people. So you start to eliminate bias when you have those people at the table, not only as you finishing your product, but as you're actually developing it, which is a different way of doing it, because that doesn't mean they have the expertise in creating it, but they have the expertise in using it, which changes the perspective and empathy.
Empathy walks and glasses. Got it. So we talked a lot about empathy. I'm going to jump a little bit into the business side. I would like Pam and then Jamie make the business case for me as to why I want inclusion and diversity in my organization.
And that's a good question, Nicole, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. You want to have inclusion in your work environment because once you've gone through the process of hiring great talent, do you want to keep hiring talent? So it starts to impact, the cost of recruitment. You have lost productivity because you're constantly training new employees, or those employees who are there and they don't feel included, they're not performing at their best. So you're really impacting and hurting your business, not only with your products and your services, but with your culture and your environment. So having that inclusive environment, when you bring in that diverse talent, they're more likely to stay. Because as we've all said before, they will feel like they belong, they have that sense of value within the organization.
Yeah, and to echo that, Pam, I would say when you don't bring on different perspectives, opinions, backgrounds, et cetera, you become more pigeonholed and obsolete, and you can have groupthink. And so by being more inclusive, to what Tommy was saying before about engagement, you're really opening it up to new ideas and to broader thinking that can help you continue to grow and challenge assumptions and think about how we can do things better, different, faster, et cetera. So I think it really is just part of your strategy.
Okay. So now I want to be an advocate, right? How do I do that? What steps do I take to become an advocate of inclusion? Tommy and then Carol.
Engage. I would just say engage all stakeholders. Don't be afraid to engage. But also, as an advocate, you have to realize that you don't know everything. So you have to be willing to learn once you engage with other individuals, whether they believe what you do or not. It's an opportunity to learn.
Collaborate. And if it was connected to the previous question, thinking about, we have a diverse supplier initiative we're engaged in, and understanding that our students will one day work at those companies. So what is our responsibility in preparing them for that? And also realizing that minority-owned businesses contribute to neighborhoods, which then contribute to schools, and then build businesses. So it's more than just the myopic where we are, but the domino effect of doing that work.
Right, exactly. So we only have a few minutes left, and all of you have chosen careers that touch diversity, touch inclusion, influence it in the environment. So each one of you, starting with Jamie, I want to know why you got in the game.
Okay, so big question. I think for me it was about culture and engagement and seeing, I'm not one of the, it's a very male-dominated industry, so I formed a seat at the table for myself, and I think, being able to bring more people to the table and different perspectives and make the culture richer is why I'm in this.
Pam?
I would say for me, just working in different global organizations, having that exposure to different cultures, wanting to learn from myself to become more self-aware, but then also wanting others to jump on the bandwagon and start to learn more about cultures within the organization, and just be inclusive with everyone, not be so isolated and siloed.
Working in higher ed, I had the opportunity to see what an adult looks like when they were not included at younger ages. So I went into this to try to redesign that for all of our children and all of our younger children that live within inside of us, to ensure that that does not happen.
Yes, Valerie.
I'm the child of two teachers, and I think as a very young child I wanted to be like them, which was to help everybody learn and grow. And I didn't start out to be in the HR business. I started out working for IBM in line roles, but then I migrated over time into organizational development and change management and eventually HR. And I'm just very, very committed to helping everybody feel like they can learn and grow. I realize I'm still doing what I thought I would do when I was a small child, but just in a different way. But that engagement and commitment to treating each person with respect.
Carol, you get an added piece to this question. Why are you in the game, and can that game be won?
So it depends on how you define winning. I've looked at DEI as a journey, not a destination. And because of that, you win in small steps. It's transformation, building blocks of that. I got into the game because someone paid it forward for me. And I'm a product of the Upward Bound program, and realizing that education is one of the few tools left for social mobility, and understand that if you give people the tools, they will utilize those and do amazing things.
I feel inspired. How about you guys? Yeah. So thank you so much, Carol, Valerie, Tommy. Yeah. It was good to meet you all, and I hope to see you around the way. Thank you.